Good afternoon, Chamber members. I'd like to call our Chamber membership luncheon to order. For those of you I have not met yet, my name is Sabrina Binkley, Head of School at Spruce Tree Montessori and Chair of the Fairbanks Chamber Board of Directors. I'd like to take a moment to thank our executive partners. These members invest beyond their general membership dues and select one of our 4 tiers of investment. Executive partners sustain the Chamber and allow us to be successful and effective, especially during transformative times like these. They also provide a solid foundation upon which the Chamber builds success for business and for our community. The Fairbanks Chamber greatly appreciates their support. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. I'd like to go now live to Brenna online to help us recognize our new and renewing members. Brenna?
Thank you, Sabrina. Hello, fellow Chamber members, and thank you to the following renewing members: Rod's Alaskan Guide Service, Interior Alaska Roofing, Journey Christian Church, Joyon Associated, Greater Fairbanks Community Hospital, Wakulla Commercial Flooring, Power and Transmission, Risk Consulting, HDR Alaska. Once again, thank you to our following renewing members, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other staff at the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. Back to you, Sabrina.
Great, thank you, Brenna. The Fairbanks Chamber continues to closely monitor and respond to the rapidly evolving recommendations related to COVID-19. Out of respect for the current health mandate for Alaska, Chamber staff, board, and committee members will remain physically separated from one another. Chamber staff are working from home, and our board and committees are meeting online in order to continue to serve our membership, coming together virtually to learn about the issues and topics relevant to our business community. Today, we're trying something new by connecting our presenter from Anchorage to our audience here in Interior Alaska using an online meeting platform with live streaming for all to access on YouTube. And you may have noticed I'm coming to you from my home. Before we get underway with today's presentation, I'll give a quick update from the Fairbanks Chamber. Our advocacy committees are staying the course and continue to work on behalf of our members. This morning, our Government Relations Committee heard an update on the CARES Act from our congressional delegation. The Chamber staff is gathering information on how businesses can leverage the benefits being offered by the federal government during this pandemic. Be sure to stay connected to the Fairbanks Chamber through Facebook or online at fairbankschamber.org, where we have created a new webpage with pertinent information about COVID-19. Keep up with other Chamber news and current issues via your subscription to The Scoop, which is sent twice weekly to your email. Our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee will also be meeting this week and hearing from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the River Road Bridge project. Our next Board of Directors meeting is scheduled for this Monday, April 6th, using the GoToMeeting platform. To continue my commitment to building community amongst our Chamber members, which I believe is paramount as we navigate the financial uncertainty and operational challenges we're all trying to address right now, I'd like simply to encourage you all to practice daily gratitude. Take a moment today to thank a colleague, your spouse, maybe your children or your doctor, your accountant, even your mom or dad. Thank someone for sticking with you, for sharing their notes, and for supporting your efforts. We're all in this together, and we will survive. Now I'd like to move on to our main presentation. Quite often in the interior, we take for granted the supply chain, though in times like this, we are acutely aware. The heart of that supply chain is the Port of Alaska. This hub is where trucks, trains, and other forms of transport load up to move items farther north. Its maintenance and function are vital to the health of our state, and we are glad to have Jim Jager with us today to present to us an update from the Port of Alaska. Jim Jager is Port of Alaska's External Affairs Director. He also works on special projects for Anchorage Mayor Ethan Berkowitz's administration. He earned a Bachelor of Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Master of Arts at the University of Missouri School of Journalism, and a Juris Doctorate at the University of Missouri School of Law. He worked for Agence France-Presse, the Associated Press, the Anchorage Daily News, and the Redding, California Record Searchlight. He taught journalism, was CIRI Corporate Communications Director, and supported development projects at the Butte Company before joining Port of Alaska and the Berkowitz administration. Please welcome Mr. Jager.
Hello, from Port of Alaska here in Anchorage. We are having a Bluebird Day here in Anchorage, and the longshoremen and women have done us the favor of going to lunch so that loading operations shouldn't interfere with this talk. Well, I'll get rolling. Port of Alaska is a municipality of Anchorage owned and operated facility. It serves Anchorage, the entire region, the state, and actually the whole country. It opened up as Port of Anchorage in 1961, and the main goal back in 1961 was Anchorage leaders wanted to have basically fresher groceries in the store, and they could get fresh food here 2 to 3 days faster than when it was coming in through Anchorage, so that's why they opened the port up. Anchorage Assembly renamed the Port of Alaska in October 2017, and really what it was is it was part of our fundraising effort as we've been moving forward with trying to replace our aging docks. You want to go ahead and hit the next slide? So the trick with Port of Alaska is, I'll tell you what, actually, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself, or got behind myself. Go ahead and hit one more slide up. Oh, no. Well, I am really messed up. I apologize. This is very strange doing this presentation with the delay. So I am actually one slide back, but I will say the trick with Alaska is we have to look at our state's logistics. Alaska is a consumer state in that we produce very little of the goods or food that we grow here. We're also a virtual island. As a result, 90% of our inbound freight is coming in by a ship or a barge. And trucks carry a little less than 5% of our freight in. Aircraft carry a little less than 5% of our freight in. But when you think of Alaska, even though we're surrounded by land, think of us as being an island. Now you can hit the next slide. We only have one road into the state. It's a 2,300-mile road from Tacoma to Anchorage. 2 drivers can make that drive in anywhere from 45 to 70 hours, depending on the weather. A ship takes about 70 hours to make the same trip. A truck is a lot more expensive than a ship. You want to go to the next slide, please? So Port of Alaska is the state's primary inbound cargo handling facility. We handled some 4.3 million tons of fuel and cargo in 2019. Goods that came across our dock are consumed by about 90% of Alaska's population, including up there in Fairbanks. We account for about 80% of the vans and containers that are shipped into South Central Alaska ports. We account for about 75% of all of the non-petroleum marine cargo that comes into Alaska every year. Southeast Alaska gets most of its cargo by direct barge service up from Tacoma, but the rest of the state gets most of their goods through Port of Alaska. We're about half of all the goods that come into the state come across our dock, and about half of that gets distributed outside of Anchorage. That's about $14 billion worth of economic activity every year, and Kodiak and Dutch Harbor both get their service because Matson vessels sail right past those communities when they're going between Anchorage and Tacoma. Next slide, please. So as I said, about half of the freight that comes into Port of Alaska then gets loaded onto other transportation means and get distributed around the state, and that even includes down in Southeast. So there's a fair amount of cargo that comes up into Anchorage and then gets put onto empty barges that are heading back down to Tacoma for distribution in Southeast from Alaska. If you want to go to the next slide. We'll talk about COVID-19 for a moment. I can tell you, you can look out my back window right now and see that there are no zombies coming over the dock. We have not had the zombie apocalypse, and the port is functioning as normal despite the ongoing pandemic. We have had no coronavirus-related shipping delays. We don't anticipate any fuel or freight delays. We've had a few of the normal kinds of delays that you get. There's a mechanical here, there's weather out in the Gulf of Alaska, but those have all been relatively short. I anticipate that our cruise ship season is going to be cut very short this year. We will see how bad it is. We've gotten notification that the first 4 of 14 scheduled cruise ships won't be making it. I don't know about the rest of the season yet. Tote and Matson, all of our fuel shippers, and the Northwest Seaport Alliance, that's Port of Tacoma, among others, they all say they expect to maintain normal operations throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody has implemented special operations. For instance, Tote and Matson are both isolating their crews on board to make sure that their crews don't get contaminated. U.S. Coast Guards, Customs and Border Protection, and the Center for Disease Control they're following their normal 6-ship protocol to make sure that no infected people come into the state through the port. And basically all of our operations are normal. Next slide, please. So folks are going, all right, if the operations are normal, how come the store shelves seem to be empty? This is a problem that is not a supply chain problem. It is a demand spike. Basically, Alaskans who are worried about COVID-19 and being stuck in their homes are going, I need some extra provisions at home in case I can't get to the store. And they've gone out and they've bought lots of goods, more than they normally would in the same period. In general, I can tell you the rail belt has about the same amount of fuel, the same amount of food, the same amount of toilet paper that it always has. The big difference is that toilet paper is now sitting in Alaskans' homes instead of on Fred Meyer's shelf. Our tonnage, I just checked the tonnage this morning. Our tonnage this week is a little bit above normal for this week or for this time of the year. And we basically think that's because the stores have been doubling down to restock their shelves. We're actually well below our maximum tonnage, so we have plenty of capacity in the system. If we were to order even more, we could get it. And it's interesting that our tonnage is up slightly because internationally container tonnage is down because of COVID-19, not because of breaks in the supply chain, but because demand has been down as everybody's been home quarantining. So that internationally fewer containers are traveling, but here in Alaska, we're actually getting a little bit more than normal. Now, one thing to think about is that most of our consumption habits have not changed from the normal. We're using the same amount of toilet paper and drinking the same amount of milk we've always consumed. Now, we probably are using a little bit more hand cleaner, more cleaning supplies, and we are backfilling those as quickly as we can. Store managers are reordering. It takes 5 to 7 days from the time they place their order to get goods up to our shelves. That's because of that 70-hour voyage that comes in, and the ships only leave on on Wednesdays and Fridays, so that if you order on the wrong day, you may have to wait till the next ship. But basically, all of our ships are traveling as normal. You want to go to the next slide, please? So, Port of Alaska is the state's most versatile port. We handle a wide variety of domestic and foreign cargo carriers. We have 3 general cargo terminals that have lift-on, lift-off, roll-on, roll-off, and break bulk capacity. We have liquid bulk in the form of all of our fuel handling. We have 2 petroleum terminals. We do dry bulk in the form of cement. We have a dry barge landing, and we handle cruise ships. So we are the most versatile port in the state. We are not the biggest port in terms of tonnage, though. Number 1 in terms of tonnage is Valdez, specialty export for petroleum. Number 2 is Port of Nikiski, again, specialty export for petroleum products. And number 3 is the Red Dog Mines facility up on the Chukchi Sea. That's a barge facility. But in terms of inbound cargo, Port of Alaska is the biggest and the most flexible port in the state. Next slide, please. So cargo handling logistics are really driven by 3 things. 1 is proximity to markets, 2 is infrastructure at the port, and 3 is transportation connections. Port of Alaska is the state's, or we are basically located at the state's business hub and population hub. 40% of Alaskans live in Anchorage, 60% live within a 2-hour drive of our dock. So we are close to markets. In terms of infrastructure, Port of Alaska has the infrastructure to handle virtually every type of cargo and commodity that crosses docks. We have 125 acres of cargo handling yards. We have 3.4 million barrels of fuel storage. We have 60,000 tons of cement storage. We have dock cranes, roll-on, roll-off ramps. We have a docksider for cement handling. We have pipelines. We have a skilled workforce. Do not underestimate the value of having, or the need for having, that skilled workforce in order to operate a port. On a non-ship day, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 225 people working at Port of Alaska. On a ship day like today, when we have tote mats in at dock, that number shoots up to about 1,250 workers. That's because of all the longshoremen and women and all the truckers who are bringing commodities from the ships to their final destinations. Next slide, please. We are also, Port of Alaska is the state's intermodal transportation. Sorry, put my tongue back in my mouth. Port of Alaska is the state's intermodal transport hub. We connect the state's primary cargo distribution systems, whether it be air, marine, rail, pipeline, and of course roads. Ted Stevens International Airport and the J-Bear runways are both within sight from our dock. Linden, Alaska Marine Lines and North Star Barge Terminal are both immediately adjacent to Port of Alaska. They service Western Alaska regularly. We have multiple rail connections on the port, and we're immediately adjacent to the main rail loading yard for the state. We have a valve yard and a pipeline system here at the port that connects Ted Stevens, our two fuel docks, Ted Stevens International Airport, J-Bear, and then all of the fuel infrastructure down in Nikiski, so that we can get fuel product from any one of those locations to any of the other locations through our dock. And the Alaska Highway System connects about 75% of all Alaskans to our dock. I mean, that's really your justification for why we changed, or why the Anchorage Assembly changed the port's name from Port of Anchorage to Port of Alaska, because our connectivity, our infrastructure, and our proximity to population really makes us the most efficient inbound cargo handling facility in the state. Next slide, please. So Port of Alaska really has three basic functions. One is commerce. That's statewide can't talk today. That's the statewide cargo services that we provide. Second is national defense. And third is earthquake resiliency, disaster response, and disaster recovery. And I guess that would even include the current COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So from a commerce perspective, we provide commerce for the municipality, the state, and the nation. Our main business is bringing freight and fuel into the state and then distributing it statewide. As I said, the vast majority of Alaskans get some of the cargo that they use on a weekly basis across our dock. We have been cash flow positive. We generate virtually all of our revenue from our cargo operations, and we have been cash flow positive since the 1964 earthquake. What that means is if we were a private business, we would be profitable. No tax dollars go into the daily operations of the port. Those are all paid with revenue that we generate from tariffs and fees on the cargo and the fuel that comes across the dock. Just in terms of numbers, the whole state benefits from our service. 90% of the liquid fuel shipped into South Central Alaska crosses our dock. Something like 80% of all the cement used statewide comes across our dock. If you look at the three biggest cement using projects last year in 2019, number one was the Liberty Energy project up off of the North Slope. Number two was there in Fairbanks. It was F-35 infrastructure at Eielson Air Force Base. Number three is the Pogo Gold Mine. So statewide development projects are using materials across our dock. Next slide, please. We are one of 17 U.S. commercial street. Boy, I can't talk today. I'm sorry. We are one of 17 U.S. commercial strategic seaports in the country. We support Department of Defense missions across the state of Alaska. throughout the Pacific Rim and in the Arctic. About 20% of the cargo that crosses our dock is somehow DoD related. Next slide, please. Just to show how important the port is to maintaining the facility and why DoD operations in Alaska are so important is that if you look at Anchorage, the 90% of the industrialized world is within a 9.5-hour air flight of Anchorage. And I suppose that's probably true of Fairbanks also. So it's very important from a strategic perspective and from a commercial perspective that our air stations keep operating. Next slide, please. Also, as we move into Arctic shipping, Port of Alaska is the only or best existing port to support Arctic shipping routes. That's not that Arctic shipping vessels would be visiting us, but the sorts of vessels and goods that are needed to support the Arctic routes are going to go through Port of Alaska. Next slide, please. From a natural disaster resiliency and response perspective, the port is key to every state and federal disaster recovery plan. And that's everything from earthquakes to this pandemic. I have had daily or weekly discussions with the various FEMAs and Department of Homeland Security as they've been checking to make sure that our supply chains are solid. In most ports, redundancy is the first line of defense. If you were the Port of Tacoma, or if the Port of Tacoma were to fail, it would be a bad day, but that port is backed up by deep water docks in Seattle, Olympia, Bremerton, Everett, Bellingham, Anacortes, Port Angeles. You can go up to Vancouver. You can go down to the Columbia River. There are lots of backup ports if Port of Tacoma fails. If our port fails, we do not have another port in South Central Alaska that has the capacity to replace our docks. Alaska has a 6 to 10 day food supply in the state. So if the port fails, basically a week and Alaska is going to be running out of food. I've heard folks say, well, we'll use air service to back it up. That's really not a very realistic solution because of air is really expensive. Also, in order to replace the 1 week's worth of sea lift, it would take 700 wide body landings to replace 1 week's worth of sea lift here at Port of Alaska. To put that number in perspective, Ted Stevens is the 5th busiest cargo airport on the planet right now. They have 500 landings per week right now. So basically, we don't have enough airport capacity to replace Port of Alaska. The other thing about Port of Alaska is after the '64 earthquake, we discovered that Upper Cook Inlet is tsunami proof. The geography of the inlet renders it basically impossible to have a tsunami up here. So the '64 earthquake took out every deep water port in South Central Alaska except for Anchorage. And that is key to our survival in the event of another earthquake. Next slide, please. So that said, I'm going to say we are not earthquake proof. As you remember, November of 2018, we had a 7.1 earthquake. It was centered less than 8 miles from the dock. We had a magnitude 5.7 aftershock less than 6 minutes later. That was only a mile from our dock. The port survived that event and we remained open, but we did suffer quite a bit of damage. If you look at all those little red dots, those were basically broken piles or other broken pieces of our dock. We did stay open and we spent the summer of 2019 inspecting and repairing damage from the dock. The good news is I think that the docks are going to survive and operate well enough to get us through the COVID-19 pandemic. The bad news is we still have a very corroded dock that needs more repairs. If you want to move forward to the next slide. These are some of the types of failures we had because of our corrosion problems that are all related to the dock's age. It opened up in 1961, remember. We had spiral seams break. We had butt welds break. If you go to the next slide. We had vertical seams on pilings fail. The reason all these welds failed is because the type of welding they used back in the 1960s when we built these docks, the welds corrode faster than the pipe steel. So that's where the weak spots are. If you want to go to the next slide. We had fender pilings fail. We have repaired pretty much all of the significant failures that happened during the earthquake. So as I said, I expect that we will stay in service and be able to get us through the current COVID-19 pandemic. The challenge is, what are we going to do going forward? The engineers tell us we have about 8 years until we have to start closing docks because of lack of load-bearing capacity. To put that in perspective, that means today's kindergarten class, the docks may be closing if we haven't replaced them about the time today's kindergarten class is going into high school. If you want to go to the next slide. So we do have a plan for moving forward and replacing the docks. It's called the Port of Alaska Modernization Program. This program really has a few goals. We want to replace our aging docks and related infrastructure before it fails. We want to improve our operational safety and efficiency. We want to accommodate modern shipping operations. And what that's really talking about is ships are a lot bigger today than when they were back in the 1960s. So we need to be able to have deeper berths and be able to handle bigger ships. And then we also want to improve our resiliency, and that's our ability to survive extreme events like earthquakes. We've been pretty lucky so far. We want to, since we don't really have a backup, we don't have the redundancy that they have at other ports, we want to harden this port to make sure it survives. Keep in mind that the Port of Alaska Modernization Program is not an expansion project. I actually anticipate that when we're done, we'll probably have a little shorter dock than we have today, but we will have greater capacity because it will be a modern dock. Next slide, please. I know people have been talking about, wow, why is this project so expensive? Well, I want to give you a sense of how big it is. It's a huge project. Because Cook Inlet silt is so deep, the piles are having to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 180 feet long. So what that really means is that from the bottom of our piles to the top of the cranes is taller than the Empire State Building. And we're 10 football fields long. So it's a huge project. Okay, we are actually moving forward with construction. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So the first new dock construction starts here in about a month. We hired Pacific Pile and Marine to start in-water construction on a new petroleum and cement terminal. That dock is, if you look, the platform that's sticking out there from the dome, that's what's going to be built this summer. We will build a trestle and just a platform for the new petroleum and cement terminal. And then we are expecting to go to bid here in the next couple of weeks for, if you hit the next slide, we're going to start in summer of 2020. We will build the mooring dolphins and put all the infrastructure on top of that dock so that it can handle fuel and cement operations, so that at the close of 2021, we expect to have a new petroleum and cement terminal in place. When that is done, what that will allow us to do is move north, and go ahead and hit the next slide. And so the new dock is the dock there that has the red ship at it. We will move north up to where you see POL 1 and Terminal 1, and we will start demolishing docks and then rebuilding the new container terminals. Basically, we're moving from south to north, and when we're done, we will have about the same amount of dock as we have today, maybe a little slightly shorter dock. The big difference is it will be about 400 meters south of where our current docks are, and our current docks are basically everything from that green ship to the left. And they'll be about 150 feet farther out into the ocean so that we're in deeper water to handle bigger ships. And that's the nut of my presentation. I guess I should talk a little bit about funding for a moment. You've heard numbers of reporting that the new docks would cost up to $2 billion. I think that number is high. It's probably more like $1 billion. The $2 billion number included a lot of pieces that were not technically part of this project. And it was also the blue sky project if everybody got everything they wanted, as opposed to us building the dock that we need and can afford. Our funding for the petroleum cement terminal is complete. We raised our cement and fuel tariffs in January in order to generate the additional revenue needed to pay off the portion of the project that was not paid for with either state or federal grants. And we are still working on raising the money, raising grants to help pay for the cargo terminals. And we will also be raising cargo tariffs in the near future, probably starting in about a year, in order to generate the revenue to pay back the bonds that we'll need to build that. What questions do I have? Am I hearing any questions?
And we do have one question that came in on the chat. So the question is, you say your new docks will have less capacity than existing structures, but you will be able to accept more volume. Can you explain that?
Okay, if I said capacity, that was a misstatement. It'll be slightly shorter in terms of the horizontal length of the dock. So we'll have fewer yards of dock. I expect that the capacity will go up because it's going to be built to modern standards. So for example, the current cement facility we have, it takes about 2 weeks to offload a cement ship. Part of that is because we have relatively old and inefficient cement offloading equipment. And part of it is because the current dock is 2,200 feet away from our cement storage facility. The new dock will be about 850 feet away from the cement storage, and it will have a modern, larger sized cement offloading equipment, so that 2 week offload time will go down to a week. So if we get 4 cement ships a year, which is about what we get in a typical year, that means we will have 4 more weeks of dock availability for delivering petroleum or other products. So that's how we'll increase capacity. The other thing that the new dock will do is, because it's built for ships with deeper drafts, it will allow the carriers to bring their cargo in on bigger ships. So if we bring in freighters that have, tankers that have a 40 or 45 foot draft, they can bring in more fuel and offload it more efficiently and less expensively than bringing in the same amount of fuel on vessels that only have 35 foot draft. That answer the question?
I'll let you know if we asked any follow-up in the chat. But we do have another question in the meantime, which is, how much increase should we expect to see in the cost of materials and supplies with the proposed or implemented tariffs?
That's a really good question, and it's difficult to answer without knowing what we get in the way of state and federal grants to help support this project. In the case of the petroleum and cement terminal, the tariff increases we had to implement will probably translate to a little less than a penny a gallon in gas when the tariffs are completely in. Now, we're bringing the tariffs in not all at once. They're actually coming in over the next 10 years. So this year, you will probably not even notice it. At the end of 10 years, a gallon of gas will cost you about an extra penny a gallon when you buy it at the pump in order to pay for the new fuel dock. Container tariffs, I don't know what those tariff increases are going to be yet, but it will be more than nothing. I don't think it's going to be high enough that it's going to force any of us to move out of the state. One estimate I've seen, and remember, all of this is going to change depending on how many grants we get in order to cover federal pieces of this and state pieces of this. And it also depends on what the market rates for loans are and other business factors. But I've seen estimates that say that a typical railbelt household will end up paying somewhere between $1,200 and maybe as much as $2,000 over the next 25 to 30 years. So that's not that much each year.
Okay, thank you, chamber members, for your patience. We apologize for the sound technical difficulty, and we'll provide further information in the Q&A, perhaps by email or as a link on our website. I do want to thank Jim Jager for his time today and for working through some of these operational challenges that we are all learning about each day. For those of you that would have normally joined us at the Carlson Center and purchased 50/50 tickets, we'd like to suggest that you spend that money with a local business or donate it to a nonprofit that's currently providing critical and basic needs during these challenging times. Given the shelter-in-place guidance from our governor and our local officials, we are adapting our presentations accordingly. We appreciate your continued participation and look forward to interacting with you next week when Chris Eiler of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will give an overview of the CARES Act relief options that exist for employers and employees. Please stay tuned to our website, and the twice-weekly newsletter for information on our luncheons, advocacy, and updates. Thank you all for joining us today virtually. Be well, Fairbanks.